Hi there, welcome to this week's video. So this week I'm going to be talking about painting water, and the sort of project for this week is hopefully for you to take what we talk about today, have a bit of a think about it, and if you can, go out to somewhere local where you've got a good stretch of water, whether it's a river, a lake, or maybe you're by the coast. Um, Extra marks for those who want to get out in a boat and sort of go and see what it's like out there. But get some reference material and try and do some painting of some water, and hopefully you can apply some of the stuff I'm going to cover now, and that will help you understand a bit more about what you're looking at. Okay, so this is part of my summer term. We've been looking at landscape painting, and we've been looking at various different aspects or sort of approaches to landscape painting, compositional design, painting trees, master copies, all sorts of things, all designed to help you make better landscape paintings, basically, to sort of to get out there. And often it's a case of just doing it. If you, the more you do, the better you will get. So that's really what these lessons are designed to do. So I've got a group of students who are following along at home, and each week they send me their paintings and I give some feedback on a Friday. And if you want to see any of their work or you're interested, you can look on Instagram, hashtag EAC Tutor, and see what they've been up to. So yeah, some really good work has appeared, and quite a lot of them have been doing scenes with water in. So it seemed like a good opportunity just to try and say a little bit more and see whether that might be helpful for you. Okay, so I'll just start off. This actually painting water and boats and those sorts of scenes has quite a long tradition. It's often referred to as marine or maritime art, and although these subjects go back really as far as art is, as art goes, it became a sort of genre in its own right around the 17th century, and it was, I think, partially inspired by, Age of Empires, lots of trade going on and battles being fought at sea. And so people were keen, in fact, to have paintings of boats to sort of document that. And so there's sort of, especially what I looked at today, Dutch marine painting. It's very sort of grand, very sort of dramatic lighting, and there's a Rembrandt painting I'll put up there to sort of show you. So yeah, it has this history, and but then more recently we see sort of the Impressionists. Perhaps a slightly different sort of flavour, which is really rivers, seas, as places of full of colour, light, places where people relax and enjoy themselves. So it's good to think about your relationship with the sea or rivers. I mean, often I find if I want to go somewhere to sort of calm down, to reflect, I think being by water, going for a walk by the coast is always good for that. So I think most people have positive associations with water, and so if you can sort of tap into those things and maybe bring them out in your painting, it's going to make for stronger paintings. So it's, as I say, it's been a theme for artists. This idea of where the land meets water for centuries. And there are some suggestions that it points to something, perhaps a deeper sort of psychological sort of idea, which is that about what water represents to us, because we can't go out there unless we're on a boat. So it sort of somewhat represents the unknown, things over the horizon. Also the different lighting conditions, the sea takes on many different moods. And there is an idea that water sort of represents the emotions, and so stormy seas or calm blue seas, they can act almost like sort of mirrors to the what's going on in people's minds, and are very evocative of these emotional states. And so that's really one of the reasons why I think it's important to sort of tap into that with your painting, because painting isn't just about documenting the world around you. You're trying to evoke emotion and to create feeling. So the more you can sort of tune into that, even if you're talking about quite subtle things, the more you might be able to infuse your work with it. So that's some of the ideas. So yeah, have a think about that, and maybe you could write down a few notes about what, how you experience some of these different locations. Now, my first suggestion in terms of sort of the long-term goal of improving your paintings of water is to base that in observation. So I'd recommend, it's like all things, there's quite a lot of theory, but nothing beats going out and actually observing from life. And of course, with water, you're looking at, obviously, you might have hundreds of thousands of little marks and waves. It can be incredibly complex, and that's why often we need sort of shorthands to sort of explain what we're looking at. So one of the best ways to do that is to look at the artists that have gone before. Again, do master copies, and in particular, pay attention to how they make waves or how they do the reflections under boats. And if you look at those things, that's going to help you, because I say often water can be so complex that you're going to need to find ways to really reduce that down. Okay. So yeah, get out there with your sketchbooks, or even it's a great opportunity to get the watercolors out. Get out there and do some studies. Maybe even monochrome studies. Try and look at the tonal patterns. That's a good place to start. Make notes, and that's the first place I would start in terms of getting the hang of drawing water or painting water. The second thing is I would suggest is to understand what you're looking at. Okay, so there are a few different things that affect the colours that you see in water. So the first one is the substrate, and that is the colour of the beach or the earth that sits under the water. Now, if you're looking at a river, say, where the river is deep, you won't see, this won't have any effect on the colour. But often you can get this quite nice transition between the deeper water and the shallow water. And as the water becomes shallower, you start to see more and more of the colour of the beach underneath, or the sand. Okay, so that's the substrate, and I say particularly in shallow water, in rivers, things like that, that's going to have an effect. So it's good to identify that from the beginning. So you have the substrate, then you have the colour of the water itself, and that's really affected by the sediment. So in the sea around Suffolk, the sea tends to take on the colour, I think it looks a bit like tea. It's sort of milky orangey grey, and it's not what, one of our problems here is with painting water is we think, well, water's blue, or the sea is blue. And of course, that doesn't really that doesn't work in sort of the majority of sort of lighting situations. So certainly on the East Anglian coast, that wouldn't help. If you go around to North Norfolk, you will see blue seas, and I think it's more to do with this. It's the sediment that's in the water that's affecting the colour. Obviously, rivers, lakes, you will get lots of situations where you're not going to get any colour, so it won't be an issue, but at least try and identify it. Then thirdly, you have the reflections. So this is most notable in still water. When the water goes still, it takes primarily the colour of anything that's above it. So it will reflect the trees, houses, and the sky and the clouds. Anything above the water will be reflected in it. And the flatter the water, the more exact that reflection is going to be. So this is why we think perhaps that the sea is blue, because often what's happening is it is reflecting the blue sky above it. But if you have a grey day or it's a yellow sunset or something like that, then there's much more likely that the water will take on that colour. So try to identify the colour of the sky and try to see beyond the blue and try to see the particular colours above and see how they're reflected in the water. There is a sort of phenomenon whereby we don't often see that. I heard once that if you walk down a road and it's just rained, you can see the reflections of the buildings in the pavement below. And again, you'll see artists exploit this quite a lot. But there's a strange thing whereby you can either see the reflections or you can focus in and see the actual pavement itself. But there's something to do with the way our brains work, is we can't see both simultaneously. So it's like you have to train yourself to look for it. And it's the same with water. You have to train yourself to try and see the reflections in the water, and that way you're going to be able to paint them more accurately. So the substrate colour of the water, the reflections, and then lastly, something you may see, which is refraction. And this is where, when you have shallow water, as the water undulates and creates little ripples, those ripples act like a lens, and they will focus the light and create these little spotlights, either on the rocks or anything that's beneath the surface of the water. And particularly in shallow rivers and stuff like that, you can get very nice effects where this light, you will see it picked up on the rocks and stones beneath the shore. Okay, that's a subtler effect though, and I don't think, certainly where we are in East Anglia, it may not be an immediate sort of problem. But again, this is where observation helps. Anything like that is going to help. So that's refraction. You'll also see it if you've ever seen posters of dolphins or sharks. You'll often see, as they're under the surface, you'll see this, it's refracted light, and it's basically where this light is being cast through the waves and creating these sort of like ripple-like colours on the objects. So what does this mean in practice? So in practice, I think it's probably best to keep things simple, which is, first of all, I would break down my water into two main colours. Firstly is the reflected light, which is the colour of the sky above. And then, assuming that the water is a bit choppy and has some movement, anywhere that you need to put in like wave shapes, usually slightly darker notes, in those you're going to either include the local colour of the water or maybe the sediment. So a good example would be on an East Anglian sort of coast, where the water's flat, you're going to get blue if it's got a blue sky above, and where you get waves, as those waves come up in little peaks, you're more likely to get that brown sort of tea colour. Okay, if it was on a river, again you get the reflected sky, and when you get little ripples, it's going to be more of a greeny colour. Okay, so try to find those two main colour notes, and that's going to help. So you establish the colours of your water, and then you also need to, wherever possible, find reflections. So whether it's boats or trees or anything that's around the water, as long as they're sort of behind you, they're going to be reflected down in the water, and they're really useful at sort of tricking the eye into understanding what you're looking at. So there's a few things you just need to be aware of there. Firstly is that the objects above the water, when they're being reflected, the colours change ever so slightly. So dark colours above become slightly lighter below, okay, and light colours above become ever so slightly darker below. So above the water we have the full tonal range from black to white. In the reflections, the tonal range becomes slightly more towards the middle. Okay, So the darks are lighter and the lights are darker, and that's going to it's going to help trick the eye. Now that's going to be quite subtle. What I often do is anything I paint above the water, I will initially probably put that colour into the water beneath. And then adjusting the tonal values will be just ever so sort of subtly done, just by adding a bit of white or something like that. So that way you can add your reflections in. So the further away an object is from the water, the less it's going to be, and the less it will be reflected. So for example, a boat in the foreground is going to be mirrored and have the same sort of depth as the boat. As the boats go away from you, the reflections get smaller. So that's another principle to be aware of. And when you have that boat in the foreground, for example, the reflection starts off usually quite hard and accurate. As it comes down, it more gets distorted by the waves. So you'll often see it being broken up, and that's why you get often these sort of wiggly lines at the bottom of shadows and stuff like that. So that's what I like to do is, yeah, get the reflections in. They really help. This is an example of one I painted the other day, or should it be over here? And it was almost like this mirror reflection. But you'll notice that I changed the values ever so slightly. Also, the colours get altered and will pick up the colour of the water slightly. So ever so slightly a sort of greenish tint here. But yeah, this one was like a sort of mirror image almost. But as I say, as the trees come towards the bottom there, that's where you get the distortions. Then what I like to do is, once you've established your painting of the reflections and the sky, then it's usually a case of then adding the marks, then adding the little broken marks to indicate water. And sometimes just even like a flat line across the reflected light can be just enough to trick the eye into recognizing that it's looking at a surface of water. Other things you get are, you'll get little dots of light on the water where there'll be maybe, I don't know, feathers or air bubbles or something like that on the surface. Those little dots of light, bigger in the foreground, smaller in the background, they also help to suggest that you're looking at a surface rather than an actual reflected object. So other things which work really well at paintings of water are, if you can get set up, here's another picture I did of a boat down at Felixstowe Ferry, and you notice the sparkles of light. So we've got the colour in the sky, colour in the water, some reflections, and then there's this amazing like speckles or sparkles of light. And if you go out with your camera, say early in the morning, I think when this was done, or later in the day, if you can get yourself so that some of that sun is being picked up in the water and giving you those sparkles, that's a really nice effect. Remember, you have to knock everything tonally down a bit, and that way when you put your sparkles on, you're going to get this great effect. So that's another thing I like to look out for. And one more thing I think is useful to say is, if you ever do get the opportunity, if you're trying to evoke the mood of beaches or rivers, it doesn't hurt to include some wildlife. And I often say in my classes, oh, maybe you should put some seagulls in, and people think I'm joking. And of course, there is a problem of seagulls, and they can become a little bit formulated, little M's or something like that. But it's true to say that if you can see birds in the sky, if you can make notes of them, if you can get them to be slightly more authentic looking, like they're based on observation as opposed to you've read in a book how to draw seagulls, they can really add something to scenes of water, whether it's sort of seagulls sort of wheeling around in the sky, or even ducks on the water, or something like that. It can add a sort of more dynamic element to what might otherwise be a fairly still scene. Okay, so those are really my main sort of tips. I think what I've found useful is to go out there and paint. I'd go back to the thing about master copies though. As I say, often it's about learning the shorthand. It's Seago is very good for this, looking at how he does the reflections. I'll also put up here some of John Singer Sargent's watercolours. They're excellent examples of a lot of the things we've been talking about here. But again, look at how simply he manages to treat the water to create the effect. And, you know, one of the things you're trying to do really is to trick the eye. So you don't want to get too fussy with it. You don't want to sort of like spend ages trying to paint every single reflection. You need some shortcuts, I would suggest. So that's why looking at the master copies will help. So hopefully that's of some use to you. There's only so much I can say here. I know it will help you to have a some sort of demonstration. So hopefully on Wednesday I'll upload a demonstration of a painting of water. But I say in the meantime, get your books out, look at how other people have handled it. Start thinking about your relationship with water, whether it's ponds, lakes, rivers, down at the seaside. Make some notes and start thinking about how you might incorporate them in this week's paintings. Okay, so look forward to seeing what you send in. I say you can always email me if you have any questions. I hope you like this video. You can give us a thumbs up, and I will see you later in the week. Thanks a lot. Bye.